All right, welcome back to Morning at NTV with me, Malaki Vilodera, of course, with Romeo Busiku. And just in case you're stepping out, by the way, we're live on Facebook and YouTube pages. That's NTV Uganda, and you'll find the Morning at NTV live stream right there. This week has been heavy on matters, education and the cost and the quality kind of equation, trying to solve that puzzle. Does it make sense? What ought to be done to stop this particular exploitation? So right here on NTV, I'm sure you've seen quite a number of stories. We are counting just days to our children going back to school. For them that haven't, especially next week, will be heavy on back to school matters. So that will be the conversation this morning, just trying to see, can the current situation be reversed, so to speak? But before we get into that, we do have this story. Let's take a watch.
One particular circular has been making the rounds on social media. A school charging over 2 million shillings in school fees for a primary one pupil. There is outrage, concern and justification from parents and others. For some, that is not a lot of money for a school that will feed, shelter and teach a child for over 3 months. For others, these charges are outrageous. With the increasing cost of education in mind, we sought to find out what constitutes a quality education.
It should develop people who have got power to take action in positive things to build their country. Take action in doing work, creating jobs.
And you're comfortable with that. Given the skills I have, I can solve problem A, problem B, problem C.
For many parents, the name of the school is the attraction. It is the thing that tells them that their child will get quality for money. But the experts say there is more to look out for.
Find out what programs are they running. Because what I'm seeing on televisions and radios, people are showing buildings, people are showing compounds. Show me whether your children in the school can speak clearly. Show me whether they know how to take part in a variety of sports.
According to the Ministry of Education, there is a well-laid-out curriculum on what should constitute a quality education. Unfortunately, many schools have chosen to ignore it to make money.
They are just bent on the cognitive domain, and they have forgotten the affective domain, they have forgotten the psychomotor domain. And this one has caused a lot of havoc in our societies. And the more we make education more and more expensive, the more it becomes restrictive, and then the more it becomes selective.
These experts argue that the current education system should be overhauled in its entirety.
Someone needs to transform, not reform, because usually we try to reform something that is not working and try to make it better. No, we have done that for a significant number of years.
Dr. Muganga, researcher and author, recommends that government promote vocational education as one of the ways of promoting quality education.
Because you exit that institution when you can actually do something. Some of them, most of them, you can do something. But now the policy is what needs to be strengthened for them and for the parents to be sensitized to understand that actually you can go to these vocational institutions.
Joyce Nakato, NTV.
Many thanks, Joyce Nakato, for that particular report. Now in studios to just have that conversation to see that, can this be reversed? Can we get some hope at the end of the tunnel? Well, it's been much talk, but zero action, I would call it that. So in studios, I have Ms. Safina Nakulima. She is the program manager, Right to Education at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, that is ISA, right here in the country. Many thanks and welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. You know, I'm a parent and I think we can start with this. We're trying to compare the school fees right now for a child joining P1. A good school, a parent has to part with nothing less than 1 million Uganda shillings. When you compare that to a basic course in university in a semester would be around 700K to 1 million point something. Why are we having a P1 child, her education, his or her education being, equivalent to that of a university going student? Where are we going wrong?
Thank you very much. And I think where we need to start from is what is the role of education. And once we understand the role of education, then we'll be able to know, does it have to be that expensive? because education is that equalizing tool where nobody can make it once they have education. It is that tool that the vulnerable, the weak, the marginalized can use to uplift themselves in society, to also contribute to the community development. So the issue is not how much is being charged, but like you rightly ask, I think the government needs to come in and rescue the situation, because how much the school charges is not in tandem with what quality would be given out. We've seen many schools that charge a lot of money, but the quality that is being given is still questionable. So for me and for the organization that I work with, we are still debating, and we've had these conversations with the Ministry of Education about the cost of education. The government needs to come in, and especially when you look at, there are different types of schools that we are talking about. We have the private schools.
Correct.
Now for the private schools, the government, once it opened up, once the government liberalized the education sector, it needs to come in and regulate. It has to protect you and me as parents. It has to protect the general public to make sure that issues of extortion are not there.
All right. So what you're saying is that if we try to just track back where we started from the liberation point, what you're saying, what government got wrong or where we went wrong is liberalizing this particular sector, commercializing it, so to speak, with zero regulations and zero policies, zero laws to govern that liberalization. Are you saying that's where we went wrong?
Partly yes, because when the government liberalized the education sector, they were supposed to come up with policies on regulation, for example, of private provision of education. If you're going to give out education as a private actor, if you build a school or if I build a school, what are we supposed to follow? That is a discussion that the Ministry of Education is now thinking about. However, without that, you see that we left education to the market forces of demand and supply.
Correct.
Yeah, so people open up schools day and night and they charge school fees according to what they want, and no one is coming to say, hey, this is the true unit cost of education. Go slow on this. And at the end of the day, you see many children are being left out, especially children who come from poor backgrounds. But I think this takes us back to what is the role of education. If we understand that if the government could get this right, they would come in to make sure that we have the right policies, the right laws that are going to curb the private person who is out to make profit for himself.
Correct.
But to understand that education is a social good.
But let me ask you a question. Why do you think government is seemingly losing out on this particular battle? You know, over the past 3 years, there's been a push and pull between the private players in the education sector and government. I remember there's one time government threatened to introduce a policy where they would regulate tuition increment and have a law that governs matters business in the private sector and education. But the private sector came up in arms, saying that you cannot touch this. And I think they are warranted because there's no law backing that. So do you think there's any end in sight for this? Do you think government will win this, especially now, like you said, when you look at matters the economy, it's demand and supply, it's an open market, so to speak. Do you think this battle will be fought well enough by government? And if so, are you saying that the first point of reference would be having a law to regulate this private sector?
Thank you very much. The government can win this this battle, because the government has the power, the muscle to regulate all services in the country. And still it takes us back to, how does the government look at education? How do they perceive it? Because at the end of the day, the government, when you look at international obligations, because Uganda is part of the international community, but also when you look at our constitution, the government has a right to provide education for all. And in situations where it opens up the sector to the private persons, private individuals or companies, it must protect. And this is only going to come if the government is committed to doing this. And like I was mentioning, for the past 3 years, I think since 2017, at the beginning of each school calendar, government has been, the public would come out to say high school fees, they hiked fees and so on and so forth. And the Ministry of Education keeps on giving out circulars to head teachers don't increase fees without going through the stated procedures. But that's it. There is no sanctioning. So the government needs to swing in action to stop just giving policies, putting things on the documents. They need to swing into action to ensure that once they give circulars, once there are policies in place, the government makes sure that they bring to book the different schools that are charging fees. And maybe just to mention that the high fees is not only in private schools.
Even in public schools alike.
We have in public, or what we call government-aided schools.
Right.
Circulars are flying out on social media with schools that we know receive public funding.
But let me ask you this.
Taxpayers' money.
You know, why is it taking so long? Because when you look at it, if you're saying, and we all know this, government has the powers to regulate any and every sector within the country. Why is it taking that long? You know, we're looking through and deep, especially right here in the newsroom. And what comes through very critically is that some of these private schools are actually owned by members of parliament, them that are in government, so to speak, as well. So do you think this delay or this, you know, kind of limbo is intentional? They're protecting themselves somewhat of us not having these particular laws.
Thank you very much. But I think one of the things, especially if you look at private schools, like you rightly mentioned, we have many people within the three arms of government, the executive, the parliament, and the judiciary, who also own schools. So you know that it becomes very hard for you to regulate what you earn from. But that should not be an excuse for government to fail, because once we do not get education right, once some people fall within the cracks, once there are those who can't access because of fees, because I remember when the UPE and USE programs were coming on board, there was research that indicated that fees was a barrier to access. Many people were being left out because they could not afford fees. And that's why we got those programs that the government felt would be able to give free education. However, even in those schools, still there are charges of non-tuition fees that are trumped up. And you find a school, for example, we go into the field in the north and in the east, and you find a school, government school, or what you can call public school, paying up to 200,000 in a family that has 6 children. Many kids that have dropped out, you know, because they cannot afford.
You know, when I was looking through some of these invoices, because we're trying to compare notes with different schools, there's this one fee that even government came out to issue a warning. I remember some time back, the Minister of Education, Kakoza, some time back, Mr. Alex Kakoza, gave out a directive that no school should charge interviewing fees. But when we are comparing notes with the invoices, a majority are actually charging interviewing fees. So why are we having the private players in this education sector seemingly having a stronger hand than government? Outrightly, this is outright impunity, saying that, hey, the directive is here, but we're going to move on this other thing. Is it also the same thing where we're having conflict of interest and there's some compromises right there?
Partly yes, but it goes back to the discussion we've just had. The government should use its powers. It is not enough for the permanent secretary, Mr. Alex Kakoza, or other officials in the Ministry of Education to give out circulars to say private schools don't do this or government schools don't do this. They need now to move a step ahead.
Who has the responsibility to push government to act? Because time and again, whenever government delays on some of these things, it takes a force for them to move. So in this particular situation, because it seems like parents are caught up in a, you know, a place whereby they can't bring out themselves, because you're looking at schools and you're looking at the public sector in terms of the, you know, government-aided schools. They're not doing so well. So as a parent, you want quality education for your child and all these things. So you're forced to pay. So when you look at this particular equation, fine, the parents, ideally, we don't think they're going to come out to push government. But who ought to push government to make sure that they act on some of these things?
No, what you're saying is not right, that the parents are not going to come out. The parents have responsibility.
They're the ones who are aiding this
To
exploitation.
participate, because when I was looking at the NTV Facebook page yesterday, there were very, very, you know, surprising comments. You know, some of the parents were saying, oh, if school X is expensive, why not go to this? You know, if you can't afford. That should not be the language. But also for parents who said enough is enough, but the talk is on social media, they need to get up and say enough is enough, and they go to their leaders.
So we
They
need to
go
have
Parliament.
parents standing up. Who else ought to stand up in this particular fight?
Parliament has also to come out, because I remember in 2017, in January, there was an outcry. As an organization, we took a petition to court, to Parliament, before the Speaker. Then the petition was heard, but nothing concrete has since been done. But I remember there were so many people who joined the online petition. Parents did, but we need to move away from that, especially as parents who are elitist, who think, you know, you're earning some good money and no, it's okay, me, I can do this. Today you can do it, tomorrow you can't. So all of us have collective effort.
Okay.
Each one of us should play. The Parliament should play its role, you know, of making laws and ensuring that they are done. But also the Ministry of Education, their policies, like we need a policy on what is the unit cost of education.
Right.
There are students who are paying 2 million in P1. There are those paying 500. There are
Even
those
in
paying 400.
kindergarten, yes.
And all the kids are passing.
Right.
What is the issue?
All right, let me look at it this way. You know, as we were doing our work right here, of course, the show, we're looking at different countries. For instance, the Netherlands. What happens there, as you wrap this up, when you look at the Netherlands, there's also the private schools and the government-aided schools. But a majority of parents actually take their children to the government-aided schools. Why? Because the quality is even much better there and the costs are more affordable. Do you think that would be the ideal solution, to just kill this giant in the room and this elephant in the room, whereby the education quality in the public aided schools is so good that parents don't have a reason as to why they need to take, you know, the children to a private school?
Thank you.
Would that be the ideal solution, to just kill this conversation once and for all?
Right. One of the things that we've been battling with, and part of the recommendations we've had to the Ministry of Education, is for government to increase funding for public schools, because all of them, you leave alone the government-aided schools that are charging 2 million and so on, but the public schools where a child from a very humble background can attend, government needs to invest more money in them to make sure that they're attractive enough, such that parents do not have recourse to the private schools for extortion. But also importantly, it's okay for private schools to operate, but government needs to regulate them and ensure that there is no extortion, and the quality of education that is being given out by these schools is in line with the set standards by the Ministry of Education.
Right, right.
Yes.
You know, it's always a gamble to look at some of these countries because, you know, we're looking at the phenomenons on the revenue that the private schools are generating in the Netherlands, and it's, you know, laughable, so to speak, because no parent wants to take their child to the private schools in the Netherlands. So you can imagine that, you know, kind of quality in the public schools in the Netherlands.
And the Netherlands, someone can say, oh, that is Europe and so on, but you go to Rwanda here. Many of the private schools are now closing because government is making all it can to ensure that they're equipping the public schools with what they need. So many parents now are moving into public schools, and that's what we need to see our government doing, to ensure that everyone, regardless of your social and economic background, you can afford education in a public school.
All right, thank you so much, Safina, for coming through. We hope that something is done and government does wake up to regulate the private schools right here in the country. Keep your views coming on #morning@NTV. The conversation still continues. As we wrap the show up, I'd like to link to Romeo Busiku for him to read out your birthdays.